anything else.
Okay, sorry for the delay, everybody, but we wanted to make sure that we got set up for those that are hearing impaired. And I apologize, we weren't quite prepared, so those in the audience, hopefully you'll be able to see the slides tonight, but we also did want to be able to accommodate those who have difficulty hearing. So, that being said, welcome, and as we usually do, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves to the audience. Start, Sam.
Hi, Sam Phillips, Director of the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
Joe Coughlin, appointee of the town of Plymouth and Nuclear Matters Committee member.
Pine Dubois, appointed by Speaker of the House.
Robert Jones, Health and Human Services.
Rich Grassy, Minority Leader of the House.
Dave Johnston, Mass DP, representing the Environmental Secretary.
Kevin O'Reilly from the town of Plymouth, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Joe Lynch, representing Entergy Corporation.
John Mahoney, Plymouth Board of Selectmen.
Bob Hayden, Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
John Orenberg at Entergy.
Amy Naples, Town of Plymouth, and appointed by the Senate President.
Richard Rothstein, town of Plymouth, appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
Paul Smith, appointed by the Utility Workers Union of America to represent the good men and women who work at Pilgrim Station.
Dan Wolf, appointed by the Senate President.
Thank you. Next order of business is to review the minutes from the last meeting on April 17th. Does everybody have a copy? Any edits, changes? If not, I'll await a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Look at that, we're already making up for lost time. Next on the agenda, update from the Interagency Working Group, Attorney General's Office. Is there anybody here representing either the AG's office or the working group that would like to give us an update?
Well, I'm still here.
No, they're still here. There you go, Dave.
Hi, everybody. I did get a message from the AGO and the work group that I can share. I don't have an awful lot to share, but I firstly do want to point out that the AGO is taking into consideration the invitation that's been provided by the NDCAP to attend a meeting. So I expect to hear back from them soon about their availability. I do have 5 or 6 items to report. I'm just going to read them verbatim. On March 29th, 2019, the NRC staff asked Holtec to provide information showing that Holtec would have sufficient resources to conduct license activities at multiple sources. Holtec responded on April 17th. On May 9th, the Commonwealth filed its reply in support of its request that the NRC account for the fact that Entergy has agreed to sell its Indian Point reactors to Holtec, which would further strain Holtec's capacity to decommission Pilgrim. The reply supports the Commonwealth's motion to supplement, which was filed with the NRC on April 24th. Commonwealth continues to work with the relevant state agencies through the Interagency Work Group and its consultant on a draft settlement agreement and remains hopeful that an agreement will be reached that protects the Commonwealth's interests. The priorities previously outlined for the NDCAP, this is, I know, something that was important for folks to hear, kind of an overview of the priorities that the settlement agreement is attempting to address. And it's a pretty high-level overview because of the issues we talked about last time. I'm sure when the AGO comes, you can seek additional clarification. So the high-level overview is the priorities previously outlined for the NDCAP remain the focus of the Commonwealth's efforts. Again, those items include financial assurances for decommissioning, site restoration, spent fuel management costs. Some examples of that are different mechanisms such as FAMS, insurance policies, contamination insurance, and so forth. 2, site restoration, including securing the compliance with all relevant Massachusetts radiologic and non-radiological cleanup standards, including the 10 millirem standard. which we've talked about quite a bit here. And then lastly, emergency response activities, including funding, monitoring, and waste transportation. EEA and the AGO have reached out directly to the emergency planning zone communities, 5 of them, to discuss their concerns as we continue to work through, hopefully, a settlement could be reached with Holtec. And lastly, I know that we've talked quite a bit here about the importance of having our annual report reviewed by the AGO and the administration as they move forward. And I think, the AGO and EEA are still looking forward to the next annual report and have requested that, if there's any continuation of good, concise identification of our highest priorities, that we should, communicate that to them. And I think in our next annual report, we should make a particular effort to provide some sort of executive summary that really nicely and tightly consolidates what we review as our highest priorities. So that's all I have for today.
Any questions from the members? Rich?
Dave, I wasn't at last month's meeting, but I had an opportunity to review the draft meeting minutes. I want to make sure I understood what you were just describing in terms of the AGO's actions. I understood from last month's meeting that Chair Mullen had asked whether anyone wanted to make a motion to ask the Attorney General to make a finding on whether or not the panel is a state organization. And if the finding is affirmative, whether the panel is therefore a client of the Attorney General's and eligible to participate in IWG discussions. I understood it didn't pass. There wasn't enough people to vote for the 11 that was needed for passage. But is anything happening with that from what you just described? Or do we need to make another motion with people who are here if it's felt that it might be appropriate under new business or old business? Maybe you could advise of the situation.
Yes, nothing to my knowledge has happened in terms of them giving me feedback on that request. However, even though we didn't actually pass it as an official act, I did share the topic with the AGO. So I'll follow up with them and see if I can get some additional feedback for our next meeting.
My concern, and also as Chair Mullen has expressed likewise at several meetings in recent past, is the frustration about not being able to interact with our state officials and representatives due to confidentialities, lawsuits going on and the like. I understand that, but I don't want to see us sitting here spinning plates month on end there if we're unable to interact some way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Moving along, I'd like to offer Entergy and Holtec an opportunity to provide an update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just give a brief update on behalf of Entergy. I don't have any prepared slides, but as many of you know, we have our shutdown date looming on May 31st, just 16 days away. So all of our efforts are focused on preparing for the shutdown of the facility, including a tremendous amount of attention on our employees. Short time after we shut down, we will start what is known as our defueling, as opposed to our refueling. That schedule will start once the reactor is cool over that weekend. While the schedule is still being formalized, we expect defueling operations to occur in the early part of June, around the 4th of the month, and go for about 10 days. Once we are completely defueled, and that'd be 580 fuel assemblies being moved from the reactor to the spent fuel pool, we will certify to the NRC, one, that we are permanently defueled, and as well, we have ceased power operations. So that in essence means we've turned in our license. The next major milestone after that is our employee separation date. That is on June 20th. And as I had mentioned, leading up to that, we have a number of things going on at the site. Tomorrow, for example, we have a career fair at the site that will allow employees to interview at some other companies, including NextEra and Dominion, Eversource, and a few other like companies in the area that have openings. So, and we think that's an outstanding initiative by some of our partners in the industry to provide opportunities for employees who did not seek a future employment with Entergy. And of course, that was a large part of our efforts, was to place people within our own organization. Also on the 20th, we'll transition to our change in our emergency plan, the post-shutdown E-plan, with 270 people in our Phase 1 organization. And then with NRC approval, we'll then transition to our permanently defueled E-plan on or about March 30th of 2020. That's about 10 months after the shutdown. And at that point, we'll go through yet another staff reduction. Approximately half of the people that we'll have on staff for Phase 1 will transition out, and that will then be our Phase 2 organization. And our focus at that point will be safely moving the fuel from the spent fuel pool to dry cask storage. And as reported at previous NDCAP meetings, we expect to have that complete by 2021. So that's just kind of a brief update on where we stand with our plans. They're consistent with what I've reported in the past. And I believe with that, we'll have a presentation by Jeremy Perriott and Joyce McMahon representing Holtec, CDI, and HDI.
Before we bring up Holtec, do the board members have any questions for Entergy? Okay. Well, welcome.
I do.
Pine does.
Joe had mentioned earlier today when I saw him that there was a plan for building the next pad, and could you repeat that schedule for me?
Sure. So as all of you know, we've selected the location for the second pad at a higher elevation than the existing pad. We have received all of the required permits, including zoning and building permit, and we've actually started the work to place the pad, do some of the initial borings, and our schedule is to have that pad constructed by the end of this year. That would be in time for us to start the loading campaign next year through 2021, where we'll be loading 44 casks for a total of 61.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming. I know your names are on the slides, but if you could introduce yourselves for the audience, that would be great.
Absolutely. Everybody hear me in the back okay? Perfect. I do get accused of speaking a little bit too softly, so if that runs into a challenge, please just chime up in the back. My name is Jeremy Perry. I'm the Vice President of Communications for Comprehensive Decommissioning International. My background here, I've joined the group from the S&C Lavalin side of the joint venture company. I am now a full-time... I knew that was coming. So just to talk a little bit about my background, I started in this industry of environmental remediation and cleaning up old DOE sites as well as some old uranium mill tailing sites and things of that nature. So over the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work at decommissioning sites around the world, as well as work in the commercial business side of that arrangement. And I'll let my colleague here introduce herself.
Good evening. My name is Joyce McMahon. I had previously had Entergy as my client in the same external affairs role, and I have moved over to CDI to serve in that same role with them. So many of you are familiar with me and I with you, so look forward to continuing this relationship. And many of you know I've had a long time in the energy industry, starting way back in '95 with DOER and electric utility restructuring. So I moved on from there.
Thanks. We appreciate you both being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So tonight I wanted to talk about a few of the things that have happened since the last time we were here at the NDCAP giving a presentation. So the topic points will really be a catch-up on those points. I did want to clarify a few things about our decommissioning organization from the corporate standpoint, really expressing why it's important for us to have it assembled the way that it is, as well as we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening under the current decommissioning planning and how that's working out with our colleagues at Entergy. Next slide, please. So, as Mr. Johnson said, we did receive an RAI on our application for the license transfer. Since then, we have responded to that. The overview details of that REI were really specifically addressing Holtec's capability to manage multiple sites. What we have done in the response to that is Holtec has assembled what they're calling their fleet management approach. In that approach, what you have are managerial positions at the site locations they consist of some of the experts that we're retaining from those sites, as well as we've now brought people that were formerly part of Holtec and part of SNC-Lavalin into that group. So they are part of the actual management group there. The other bit that's very important to Holtec's fleet approach is we are adopting a lot of the procedural organization to these plants. We're creating our own lessons learned portfolio and quality assurance and safety programs, all of these things to ensure the safety, security, and regulatory compliance that's going to be necessary to decommission these plants at multiple sites. So with that, we have brought in numerous experts from the industry. We are adopting individuals from the sites, and we are putting in process and management oversight for each one of these that will be maintained at a corporate location and ensuring that all of those things are consistent across those sites. At this point, we're very confident that we have the staff in existence, as well as those that are coming over to carry out that decommissioning at multiple sites. Next slide, please. So our decommissioning organization has really raised a lot of questions. And I think the key point that needs to be made with this, I know that you've seen this slide before, Holtec International will be the principal owner of all of these companies. Now, they're also the principal owner of the Pilgrim site, which means they will take over all of the long-term liability, and they'll be the company that has this project for however many years this carries forward, and they will own that property, those assets, and the liability for the long term. The wholly owned subsidiary here that you see that is Holtec Decommissioning International, this is an organization that was set up by Holtec to manage each one of these sites. They will be the licensed operator of these sites. And yes, it is an LLC. The reason for that is Holtec has a number of different divisions within the organization. To detract from their core business, they actually wanted to create a decommissioning organization that had its own board, its own managerial oversight, as well as a second set of checks and balances for managing how these decommissioning projects are going. Now, comprehensive decommissioning is purely a decommissioning general contractor. Now, CDI, the acronym, CDI is a joint venture company between SNC-Lavalin and Holtec. Now, I think you've seen my colleagues come and talk about the benefits and some of the features that have gone into that. The reason it was important to separate that out is CDI is actually a global decommissioning organization. We have, of course, the numerous plants that we'll be doing here in the United States, should these license transfers go through. However, CDI may also operate decommissioning at a different level, directly from different utilities and things of that nature. So it combined all of the project management, decommissioning experience and technologies that SNC-Lavalin had with the spent nuclear fuel, large project management, ISPC construction, and design engineering that Holtec had. Those coming together created an entity that could then contract to any utility out there, as well as have a direct contract to Holtec Decommissioning International. Now, that will be a contract with its own set of terms and conditions directly from comprehensive decommissioning to HDI. So, are there any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Rich.
I'm not sure you got the button first, but I'll.
Okay, here you go.
Okay. I'm still a bit confused. I thought I remembered that there was a fourth entity that was, I don't have my notes here, so I apologize, but it was kind of in between Holtec International and Holtec Decommissioning, like Holtec Pilgrim, a limited liability partnership that was going to be the actual owner of the facility versus Holtec itself.
You are correct. There is a group at Pilgrim that will own the sites as well, and then one at Oyster Creek. That is, we've put it is structured that way, and again, though, the principal owner of all of these assets will be Holtec.
Yeah, the reason I just mentioned that is it's been kind of a big issue of concern, I think, relative to whether it was actually Holtec International that was taking ownership of Pilgrim, and therefore all the liability that might extend beyond the FAM, versus a limited liability partnership group that was taking control, or limited liability corporation, I'm sorry.
Right.
So I think in the last discussions we've had, the understanding I've left with was that Holtec International was not actually going to own Pilgrim, but that it was going to be Holtec Pilgrim, the LLC, that was going to own Pilgrim.
There is an LLC that becomes the holding company for that. You're absolutely correct. That is a direct, wholly owned subsidiary of Holtec, so the principal does lie there. And I think to further that point, Mr. Toomey was here not too long ago, and he even addressed the fact that this is very similar to the way fleets are operated across the nation and the way Entergy is set up.
Right, and I guess I just want to, so that, to me, would mean that that's inaccurate, what we're looking at up there. I guess that LLC is absent, I think, from that screen.
No, that is a fair point, and I think I would take that into consideration because it is represented in the public filings that we've made with both the LTA and some of the other disclosures that we've had. My point was not to bring something here that would be, any kind of deception. It would just get very convoluted if we had all these other subsidiaries out here that, because we will have that same thing at Oyster Creek. We will have it at Pilgrim. I think the key message, though, here is that is Holtec. So the assets of that corporation will be what is tested with the NRC.
Yeah. Me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I appreciate it. This is the best explanation we've had yet of the relationship between Holtec, CDI, and all the other elements. The question that it brings for me is in terms of CDI.
Mm-hmm.
If CDI is teamed with Lavalin, am I correct?
Actually, it's not a teaming arrangement. It's actually a joint venture company.
But that's what I wanted to hear. Okay, it's a joint venture company, and to what sort of a contractual relationship will they have with Holtec?
So it will be a general decommissioning contract that is set up in place between Comprehensive Decommissioning and Holtec Decommissioning International.
So the performance criteria.
That's a very good question.
Would you please talk to that?
Yes, and I do not know the specifics of the contract. The contract actually is not in place right now. It is still being negotiated. There are a number of things that will be contractual obligations for the joint venture to put up in place, whether those are performance guarantees or things of that nature. There may be some things at that level that enter into that contract. And that entity will be responsible for that.
Will there be a performance contract specification or any kind of design requirements or anything that Holtec will document and give to CDI as sort of a performance guide?
I'm not sure I understand
Not either.
that question. So I think what you're asking me is whether or not there will be contractual obligations set in stone that, yes, Holtec has to honor as well as the
That's not what I'm
contract.
asking. What I'm asking is if CDI is not, it's a separate organization from Holtec. So therefore contractually, if they're going to do the work, Holtec has to have a very strong contract with them and a means by which they can monitor their performance, make sure they're reaching certain goals and objectives.
Yes.
And figure a way out to pay them and yourself as well. It's a very complicated structure. And you've never done this before, am I correct?
This structure and the asset acquisition is currently
Not for
underway.
decommissioning, though. Is that
There
correct?
is a case at Vermont Yankee, so the business model is there.
Okay.
You're asking if we've done this contractual model
Correct.
before. No, this is our first coming off
Okay.
out with this. Now, I will note, though, you did hit the nail on the head there in saying that, yes, there will be contractual obligations managed by HDI, which is actually a benefit, and that's why we see the structure of this being a benefit to that. It adds that level of checks and balances before anything hits a trust fund withdrawal or anything along those lines. So as the licensed operator, they will have the obligation to make sure that CDI is meeting all of not only the contractual obligations, but the licensed obligations as well.
Although Holtec owns the site and the license.
That is true.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide?
Not
Okay.
yet, not yet.
Senator?
And I apologize, I'm still incredibly confused. So, just talk us through this. Which Holtec is the license transfer going to? Is it Holtec International or Holtec Decommissioning International, or the not depicted entity that's up there?
This is, okay. You're asking, so we don't have the other depicted entity up there. You're absolutely correct.
And they're the ones who are
They're the ones that will hold that.
and the name of that is, I'm sorry.
It is Holtec Pilgrim Group. I have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, and to what degree, in the worst-case scenario, to what degree will Holtec International have any liability?
They will have all of the liability.
So that,
They are the principal.
even though so is Holtec International going to have access to the decommissioning funds or not?
Holtec International will have access to those decommissioning funds. They
And
will
so
be
the
man-
flow of money is decommissioning fund through Holtec International to the entity that's not depicted up there, who will then be engaging a general contractor to do the actual work? Is that,
Yeah, I think maybe you're,
I'm confused, so I apologize. I'm not
Yeah.
acting stupid, I
So-
just might be
no,
stupid.
No, it's actually a really good question, and it's not a stupid question. So right now, that contractual structure between CDI, the contractor, and HDI, that has not been established. There's a framework there for that, and we're working to that. That is really where the decommissioning works, and any releases and approvals for the trust withdrawals will happen. That's the first check. The entity that is sitting there holding the site, that is synonymous with Holtec. It is one step removed. However, all of the financial capability and capacity of Holtec is what will be leveraged in the asset
Can I
ownership.
just follow up? Yes. None of these entities would be taking the role that they're taking unless there was a financial incentive to do it, unless they thought there was going to be a profit involved with that. Do we have the ability to see, is there enough transparency that we can understand what that financial incentive is to Holtec International, to the entity that exists that's not up there, to Holtec Decommissioning International, and to Comprehensive Decommissioning International? There are a lot of entities now that have a financial stake and that actually have a role in this.
Yes.
And I guess this is really complicated. And I guess, I would like to see some kind of flow chart or organizational chart or something with numbers attached to it that help us really understand. There's two issues here. One is, where is the money actually going and for what purpose? Where does the ultimate profit end up? And then who, in the worst case, actually has a liability? Because very often, when a structure is set up, it's to insulate certain parties financially and from an operational liability. And I guess, maybe we've been accused in the past of not actually devouring all the information, so maybe my appetite to devour the information hasn't been voracious enough, or maybe the information just isn't there in a clear enough way for some of us to understand, but I am having trouble understanding. Maybe Jim, when you're doing your public comment, you can clarify. You can't do it now, but because I am really unclear on this. I apologize.
So I think that this actually warrants if you would be so kind as put these questions into a category, have the chairman send those to us. Perhaps the best motion here would have one of our experts come back and explain the financial arrangements to you, as well as our legal team. So I'm not prepared to do that this evening.
That'd be great. And David, just one last thing. David, I assume that the working group, that when they're concerned or looking at the financial viability of the decommissioning process, that they are including in that the corporate structure, making sure that the corporate structure actually serves not the corporate mission, but the mission of the citizens of the Commonwealth, to see that this is done both financially in as beneficial a way to the citizens, but also from a safety perspective and an expedience perspective. So that, that I understand that there's there's a plan that hasn't been submitted as part of the license transfer for how this is gonna go, but I don't think that, I think we need more understanding of the corporate relationships that are gonna end up driving that to a degree. So I would really ask that the working group focus spotlight on that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, Kevin, thank you. Through the chair, perhaps my comment, really not a question, isn't for Holtec, but perhaps Mr. Hayden or Mr. Lynch could chime in at this point. This really isn't any different than 1999, when we deregulated the utility industry in Massachusetts, and the Entergy Corporation came in with a similar setup, okay, where Entergy, an out-of-state company, held all of these sites, Indian Point, Pilgrim, Palisades out in Michigan, and each of them was its own LLC, I believe. So the structure should not be totally unfamiliar to us. The Decommissioning Trust Fund transferred with the license, just as is being suggested today, but that was 1999. So this is not our first time. My only personal question, and not to be parochial, but will Holtec Decommissioning International be represented on site by at least a vice presidential level, an officer of the company, so that if the EPA or any of our state organizations were to come in to speak, the responsibility is obvious and the company is liable?
Yes. In fact, as the licensed operator of the facility, they will have that oversight on site on a daily basis.
I'm going to go to Joe, then back to you, Dan.
To continue with that same issue that Dave and Senator Wolf had raised, even though I wasn't able to be here last month's meeting, I know from the minutes that, Dan, you had asked the question as to who'd be, entity would be, would own Pilgrim and so forth, similar to some of the questions tonight. Mike Toomey had responded, and it seemed like on the surface it was a clear understanding, but it's not, because of what's been shown here and what we've partially discussed in the past. And he had said from the minutes, Holtec will own the site, CDI will do the work. Pretty simple. But which Holtec? There are a bunch of Holtecs. And maybe along the lines of what Dan was just suggesting, maybe if a simple chart could be, sometimes visual is easier to understand the narrative. Could we put together with the main entities and then showing on the chart what the most important issues are that have been raised? Who's going to do the work? The arrow goes to CDI. Who's going to be responsible financially? Is it going to be Holtec International? Is it going to be Holtec Pilgrim? Is it going to be Holtec Decommissioning? Or will there be multiple arrows going to multiple boxes? I don't think, from my own perspective, such a chart should be that difficult to put together. And if you can do that and address the major points that are being raised and have been raised multiple times in the past, I think that will go a long way to help us understand the complex issue that keeps coming up.
Right. No, and I will put this into, again, let's get a formal question coming forward, because again, this was not put out to deceive. This was to try and simplify that, sure, to explain that, the Holtec entity, Holtec International, is the ultimate principle in all of this deal. So let's look at that in the future and hopefully get an opportunity to come address
Senator,
that.
I'll go back to you and then to Rich, okay?
And Paul, I appreciate your comments. I mean, precisely the concern we should have is that if this replicates in any way or is similar to the 1999, I think we have to remember that what we lived with for a number of years was a plant that was in Category 4 relative to safety. And while there was not an incident, and we only have 16 days left, statistically, the reason that we rate plants from 1 to 4 is that the statistical safety outcomes are related to that rating. And I would argue, and it's the point I'm going to make over and over as we look at this structure, there is a relationship between outcomes, corporate structure, and where the money comes from and how it flows through and where it ends up. And I just think we have to, as a Commonwealth, really be paying attention to that. That's the point I'm making.
Rich?
Just quickly, it's been a couple months since I had read the license transfer application, but working from the bottom up, I thought, if my memory's correct, that Holtec Pilgrim would be the ultimate licensee for the spent fuel management and the decommissioning of the facility. So if that's still the case, then ultimately they would be responsible for reporting to the NRC each year about the adequacy or inadequacy of the decommissioning trust funds. That's my recollection, but I may be wrong about that, but time has passed.
So, no, I can appreciate that. And it is what I've explained here tonight. HDI will be the licensed operator for the site. The entity that owns Pilgrim, which will be Holtec, will have that principal obligation. Thank you.
I think it's time to move on to the next slide.
No, that's fair. All right, so what is happening right now? So obviously, you know, as Mr. Lynch explained, the plant is shutting down very soon. Within a couple of weeks, you know, this is something that the community is feeling. I believe it's raised a lot of concern for a very long time. So I want to talk a little bit about the work streams that we're currently doing within CDI and HDI, as well as collaboratively with Entergy to ensure that it's a seamless transition and we maintain the safety and security and regulatory compliance that we've set forth with all of the applications and everything we've done. So there are two parallel work streams currently happening, and some of that is happening at the HDI, CDI corporate level, and some of that is actually happening at the site. So on the transition day one focus team work, we're really looking at finalizing the site organizations. So this is a big human resources exercise. As Joe mentioned, there are about 270 employees that will be transitioning over. At this point, those employees will come over into CDI. I think we've previously stated that. So what we've done is we've actually issued offer letters to these individuals, and we're in an interim period where they can respond to those. So as the site organization gets finalized, that will help further define the work streams and where people have responsibility within the organization at the site. The other bit that we're working on is finalizing the integration of corporate and site governance. So, you know, as you can imagine, with the Holtec fleet approach, it's not just taking and adopting those procedures at the sites that are within regulatory compliance, but also understanding how you manage that from a corporate side to make sure that each one of those sites is operating similarly within regulatory compliance for that site, but also in a mechanism where we can increase safety by sharing the lessons learned between sites, as well as that governance to make sure that everything is being done properly and filings are happening properly. The focus on successful execution of key transition items, you know, there are a couple of them in there. Staffing, including qualifications and training. This is really directed towards the change management that's happening at the sites. And what I mean by that is, you know, we are going from this operational standpoint into decommissioning. There are a lot of safety concerns as far as just that cultural change. We've all been in different workplaces where things change. So there will be some training, understanding, you know, this is how work is done. It will be very similar to what happens today, but the objective and the mission is to decommission a plant, and that does have with it its own, I guess, bespoke challenges to get through. So we'll be working on those training and getting people transitioned that way. Programs and procedures to maintain compliance, it's almost a reiteration of the second bullet there. The IT and communications, there are a number of things that obviously with corporation Entergy versus corporation Holtec or CDI, we do have to bring these things together. We want that to be a seamless transition for everybody, not just in the documentation and what's on site that needs to be retained historically, but also ensuring that cybersecurity requirements are met, ensuring that employees on day one know how to do timesheets and that that infrastructure is set up. So that's the day one transitioning focus. Now on the parallel side, as we've mentioned and I think I have some of my colleagues here with me tonight in the back. You guys mind standing up for just a moment or raise your hands? So these gentlemen are actually ingrained on the site. They've moved to this area. They've been here for the past, since August, more or less. You can sit now, John. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. You know, the other side of that too is we have our Entergy colleagues here, and most of them will be transitioning with us as well. So they've been doing a lot of workshops. They are on the site day to day, planning these work streams. So developing the detailed decommissioning project scope, schedule, and cost, that's really key for this, especially as you look at when you're bringing in this organization now, we have definition of roles, we have definition of labor categories, things of that nature. Finalizing project scope is really, you know, planning out for our things that may be subcontracted out, defining that schedule as it fits to this project, as well as, you know, if in fact there are any sort of slips because of what we're going through here with the petitions that are currently with the NRC. The validating readiness of the CDI programs and procedures, this is a little bit unique because we have the opportunity right now with two major utilities, both Exelon and Entergy, and then two decommissioning transition staffs that are sitting at these sites, so that we can do sort of a four-square analysis and challenges to one another to ensure that the safety and the quality, the procedures and everything are lining up. So on day one, when this transition happens, things are seamless. So, you know, regardless of corporate structure, I think we are putting in the right programs and things that ensure that the safety does not get missed. With the finalizing the vendor contracts for decommissioning activities, there are expert work scopes that will be done under these projects, and those do get subcontracted out. So we do put those in under a competitive bidding process. With many of these, some of them will be your local contracts, and we do have an emphasis on trying to do business with companies in Massachusetts and within this region. When we look at some of the other bigger scopes of work, whether that be large component removal, reactor segmentation, things of that nature, we're, you know, that applies to what we're doing for our final design cost here as well. Now, some of those obviously will come from out of state. However, there's a lot of external union labor that will be involved in those things. And we have had those addresses now with the union labor that is internal to the site. So things are going very well there. Supporting the execution of physical plant changes. So right now, obviously, with the shutdown and the defueling, we do have people on site who are monitoring that work, gaining those lessons learned as they go through that as well. And helping them with some of the critical decisions that need to be made. So next, I believe that's all. And with that,
Rich?
Jeremy, earlier you mentioned that NRC issued an RAI, request for additional information, that Holtec responded to regarding multiple site decommissioning. Do you have any thoughts or opinions about the Pilgrim site versus other sites in terms of what you divulged or mentioned to NRC in terms of any issues that are unique to Pilgrim that may differ or not differ from any other site that you've come across that could affect NRC's schedule for making a determination about approving or disapproving the license transfer application?
you know, I don't know that I can speculate on the NRC's decision, and no, it's not like we call the NRC every day and ask them for a status. However, when they're evaluating these, they are evaluating it for the plant specifically. Now, they're very aware of our application in with Oyster Creek, and they're very aware that we're doing this, as well as the recent announcement that we'll be engaging in a PSA for IPEC. So, you know, they are all in the loop of as to what is happening. I'm sure it is weighing on that, based on the RAI and the ability to manage multiple sites at one time. So, you know, I don't think there's any discrete challenge that we're looking at right now as getting in that way. But again, it's the NRC's process, and we're here to answer those questions as they come up.
And you can't assume that just because Pilgrim may have been in a certain pecking order in terms of license transfer applications, the NRC will act sooner versus later in terms of when these were filed by the current licensees each plant.
Right. Well, I believe that as far as decommissioning goes, you know, we submitted the Oyster Creek one a couple of months sooner than Pilgrim. And so in that nature, I would anticipate that does come back sooner. But again, I don't want to speculate on the NRC's process because I believe they're going to go through this. And obviously, there are petitions that are in play right now that are, and to be fair, I know the frustration of this panel. Everybody here is a volunteer, and you've expressed the frustration with not having hands-on. But I would say that based on the wording and things that are in those petitions, that they are listening to you and you are influencing this. So, it's not falling on deaf ears.
Sam?
I think I assume this is HDI, but I think in addition to the kind of outlining of how the finances will flow, for my perspective, just being really clear about who we work with from a public safety perspective and just having really clear lines of communication and operational coordination. So, I think that that's something that, we're really interested in.
Absolutely. We look forward to engaging on those and doing some training and things of that nature in the future.
Senator?
Yeah, just real quickly through the chair, I wonder if Jeremy and Joyce might be willing to stay through the public comment period, because I think in the past there's some interesting points that have come up, and I don't know if you have the capacity to do that.
I would be happy to do that. Now, given that the petitions are in, there are certain things we may not be able to, respond to directly. However, I'll do my best to give you answers as I've done today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Rich?
Jerry, with the four gentlemen that you just introduced, are they Holtec employees?
Those are comprehensive decommissioning employees.
Sorry, you got me. Were they former Holtec employees?
I believe the gentlemen behind me they came over from the SNC Lavalin side.
Will you have integrated teams of Holtec and Lavalin as part of the decommissioning, or will Lavalin, in other words, Holtec wrote the PSDAR, but Lavalin is really the decommissioning expert, am I correct?
So, actually, I don't know if that's a complete fair assessment,
Right.
but let me explain what the decommissioning organization does in its role. So, for example, I was an SNC Lavalin employee prior to coming into CDI. As CDI was stood up, I was actually released from SNC Lavalin, and I'm no longer an employee of SNC Lavalin. I'm now an employee of Comprehensive Decommissioning International. And that has happened with some of the Lavalin employees and some of the Holtec employees. We are part of this new entity.
So it'll be an integrated team.
It is an integrated team.
Right.
And adding to that, too, we will have the professionals and experts that came from Entergy as well in that team.
And then there will be, since you're employees of CDI, then there will be separate contracts put out to various vendors for various tasks as part of decommissioning, which CDI, I believe, will implement. Is that correct, or Holtec?
Yes, so as the decommissioning general contractor, the decommissioning works that are the management of that, basically the tearing down of the plant and managing those work steps, that will be done by Comprehensive Decommissioning International. And there will be subcontracts that come from CDI to that, yes.
One quick question, the Indian Point, am I correct on the term, Paul? Indian Point?
That's correct.
You are going to have that under contract as well, am I correct, Holtec?
We have entered into a PSA at this point.
Is there any change to the schedule that you submitted as part of the PSDAR that was done prior to the Indian Point negotiation, or whenever you decided to do it? Is there going to be any change to the current schedule in the PSDAR as a result of you assuming these new contracts? And will the same individuals, yourself and the individuals you mentioned, sorry, I don't know your name, guys, so I can't. No, are they going to be part of the Indian Point project as well?
So that is a really good question, and let me just see if I can clarify it as best as I can. No, I do know the answer to that. I really do, and that's why I'm just gathering my thoughts, because I do babble a little bit. So when as we've gone into the Indian Point negotiation, that's been in a commercial space and it's been in a competitive process. The team that is currently doing Pilgrim will be at Pilgrim. Now, some of the licensing and regulatory oversight from a corporate level, either CDI or Holtec, that will be somewhat of a shared resource, but you're not going to lose key players from this site to go over and do that, and that site will not impact the schedule that we've set forth for this project.
Thank you. Mr.
Jim?
Any other questions?
Yes, for the good Vice President. Entergy is going to be releasing 270 employees to Holtec Decommissioning. But you're
CDI.
not going to limit yourself to just those 270. There is perhaps other opportunities for those good people who live locally and want to stay local. They'll be considered?
Yes. I mean, we are going to be here for, the duration of the decommissioning. There will be other opportunities. And even in regard to that, even when the subcontracting groups are coming in, they are there to supplement the existing workforce, not to replace that workforce. And so that will be large groups of people that come into the community, staying in hotels, eating in restaurants. And some of that will actually involve some hiring of local individuals to do that work.
Thank you.
Okay, last chance for the board. Any other questions? Great, thank you, and thank you for offering to stay through the end of the meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay. So next on our agenda is the review and update the issue and topic tracking list. Does everybody have a copy? Anyone need a copy? Okay, great. Yep. Hey, Bob.
You have extras?
Yes. Yes, those do. Anything good that way? Okay. I know Jack's not here, but I want to thank him for initiating this and putting it together. So the first one was to provide the panel records of information regarding the safe and effective decommissioning of the facility. Any updates on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's really two questions here. One is requesting access to some of the files that we've amassed over the years of operation. The 10 CFR 5075 golf files are, in essence, the files that document spills on the site. As I had mentioned, these have been all reviewed and put into our historical site assessment. I'm still working on providing a means to access that document. I've had discussions internally as recent as yesterday on it. And because of the intervention that we have with both the Commonwealth and Pilgrim Watch, I can't make that available. The second part of the question is ensuring that these records are kept in an identified location. They are plant records. They will be retained through decommissioning, and they're in our long-term record storage. They're also auditable by the NRC, and they have looked at them many times over the years. So that's not a concern that these records will go away into the future.
Okay, thank you. The next one was to our chairman, who's off on vacation, provide an invitation to the EPA, which was declined. So I'll let Sean deal with that when he gets back.
Excuse me, Kevin, is this relative to Pine's concern about
The NPD,
status
yeah.
of the NPD?
The NPDES,
as
yeah.
opposed to any other
Yes,
issues?
specific to the NPDES.
What about-
Any comments, Pine?
Do I have any answers? I don't have any
No.
answers.
Any comments?
What was I was distracted with paper. What
Oh,
was-
this was, Sean took the task to invite the EPA to come in and present to us regarding the NPDES, and that invitation was
So is there any
declined.
comment on the fact that we're past 5-1?
The invitation was extended and declined.
Yeah, it was declined.
It was declined, is the one above.
Oh,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
declined.
Yes,
I
it was
see what you're
declined.
asking me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I could see if I could get a job at EPA, I guess.
Okay,
But
thanks.
Kevin, at such time, there wasn't any request to have him come to discuss other issues, although other issues could
May-
That
certainly
was-
come
it
up
was-
if they were to
there
show
ano-
up here.
Is there another way we could do it? Could maybe some of us go and meet with the EPA?
Did they indicate why they declined it?
No, I don't know why, but it was specific to the NPDES, the request.
I think the last time we had this conversation with them, by way of telephone, that there was some indication that maybe in October there would be a permit or something like that. but I think that it's entirely reasonable to try to follow up with the EPA by going to visit them. If you want
Okay.
me to, I'll go try and do that. Otherwise, I would like you to.
Okay. We'll put that as an action
To
item.
the chair. Point of information, that's usually a joint permit between the federal EPA and the state mass wastewater. Perhaps Mr. Johnson would entertain, is there a state organization that is a co-signer to that?
I think it's DEP.
The DEP?
Sure. Yep, here you
That's true, Paul. We issue joint permits.
Yes, sir.
NIPD's primacy does not rest with the state, so the first order of business is for the federal folks to finish their review under the Federal Clean Waters Act. And then we issue a joint permit under the State Clean Waters Act. So part of the way the partnership works is when the federal government has established their permit conditions, we need to certify that they comply with all of our state requirements, that they're at least equivalent, and then we issue a joint permit with them.
Do you have, can I ask David? David, do you have any indication what the holdup is? I know that the last conversation that I had with them had to do with, we had so many comments come in 2016 that it's taking a long time to deal with that. Is that genuinely the hang-up there? Is there any specific comments that they're struggling with? Or, is it just that it's a pile as high as this building and they can't quite get to it? Do you really know what the hang-up is?
I had the same information that you have, that it was the volume of the comments that was slowing everything down. They haven't made DEP aware, or as far as I know, that there are any specific comments that are giving them, particular difficulty.
Can you think of another way that we should approach it?
I can, I can reach out to them and see if I can't get a little bit of additional information. I did see the invitation from Chairman Mullen, and I did see the response from EPA declining the invitation and referencing the volume of comments as far as the delay goes. But I can reach out and see if I can't maybe get, more information than that to report. So let me try to do that for next meeting.
Yeah, I think it'd help. Thank you.
Thanks. Next one, quick and easy. Posting the minutes and documents to the NDCAP website, which I believe has been done. All minutes have been uploaded. If there's anything missing, please make me aware of that, and we'll make sure they get up. The last one was, this was back from November, when folks from Holtec were here. It's not to put it on you, Jeremy, but he was going to provide us, Dr. Anton was going to get us more information on the dry cast canisters. So if you could put that on your action list, maybe for the next meeting, we'd appreciate that. Sure.
Apologize, I'll come up here because I do realize people are trying to listen in. The questions that Dr. Anton said he would respond to, do you know, perhaps you can give me a little direction here on what that was specific to?
We can get you the minutes from that meeting and get you the specific request.
Okay,
So
okay.
make sure that,
Yes, that would be, I would appreciate that. There are a
Okay.
couple of things I'm making notes now, and at the
Sure.
end of the meeting, I would like to go through and talk about the things that we've said that we would get back to you on so that you know that they are actionable.
great, thank you. Does anybody have anything to add that we haven't got to before we move on? John?
Yeah, I just a quick little update. I have to duck out early. I have a conflict tonight. I have to be somewhere at 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to let everybody know that there's been communication in between the town and Holtec, and tomorrow there's a meeting occurring with Chairman Tavares, who's in attendance tonight. Vice Chair Provenzano and Town Manager Origi will be meeting with Holtec officials tomorrow, so can't wait to see how it goes, and hopefully it'll be productive and cover a whole litany of issues.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ken. Okay, moving on. At our last meeting, we decided that we were going to review and discuss the draft annual report, and our task was, for this meeting, was to take a look at the table of contents and have a discussion on what we would like the table of contents and the structure of the report to be. I know Sean, before he left, sent out his draft and his thoughts, and I'd like to open that up for discussion with the members of the board, if there are any. Rich?
Yeah, Joe and I have talked about this earlier, and we tend to agree. You can follow on the conversation here, Joe. We tend to agree that the work of the working groups is all subsumed under here, under attachment Z. Is that right? I don't know. Anyway, we think that the next step for the working group chairs is obviously for the next meeting to review the recommendations and the assumptions that they put in there.
Correct.
And then come back. But the other thing that we think, or we would propose to the panel is that rather than put the assumptions and recommendations under each working group, we would have them as parts of the report with bold headers, you know, like ISFSI planning or emergency management or whatever, rather than under the banner of the working group. We can assign a working group in parentheses to the recommendation. That's okay, and that carries that reference from the current annual report that we have into the next annual, the second annual report. But that's what I'd recommend right now in terms of the outline. Joe?
Yeah, I'd go even more simple. When I had submitted my initial draft of the outline for the report, and Sean distributed it, it was after an extensive conversation that he and I had and meeting we had prior to that, and thought that maybe the best approach, similar to what Rich just said, but with a little slight variation, would be, since the working groups really haven't met officially this year, but the last year's report that contained the panel recommendations and then the work group observations and recommendations, but was never officially responded to by the three entities that the report went to, that typically means that those work group observations and recommendations are still open, they're still on the table. And as such, maybe the easiest thing would be similar to what Rich just said, but with a little difference. If the panel wants each of the work group chairs to pull out last year's report from their records, look at the recommendations that their individual groups went through, determine which ones may still be valid or we believe may still be valid, come back at next month's meeting and say, okay, this one, we believe are still valid. Whether they want to meet with their work group or not, or just have the chair do it, but then have the panel make the final decisions at next month's meeting to say, okay, here are, there's 6, there's 10, there's 20, whatever the number is, that those chairs say, we still think these are valid. Then have the panel discuss them and say, okay, out of those, which ones does the panel want to make a decision on? Let's say that then is cut down to 4 or 5, again, perfectly fine. Then just have the report say, without the background, these are just, there could be a little narrative lead-in like there was last year to some of the sections. Here's how we came up with this. But these are the panel recommendations for this year's report, and they would be whatever they are. And the breakdown listing the work groups in the outline wouldn't be there. It would simply be attachment Z, if it winds up being, is simply panel recommendations, observations and recommendations for this year's report, period, with maybe a little narrative explanation of how we got there. And it would just be that simple way. Second thing would be a section, a line item, which I had put in my draft, that would indicate what was either the activities and/or the status activities for the IWG and the town in their negotiations or efforts with the current licensee and the proposed licensee, Entergy and Holtec. We know there's been meetings, we know there have been discussions. We fully understand that if the input on those two issues were from those two entities, that the discussions are still ongoing, and as a result of that, we really can't give any specifics on them. And if that was the end in July when we're trying to finalize it, or August, whatever, if that was still the position, that could be fine. But the report could simply say, the IWG, from a pure narrative standpoint, has it been engaged with, has been meeting on its own, and then engaged with the current and proposed licensees to discuss these priorities, and that was it. And/or if the town said the same thing, because we have the list of priorities from the town that Sean presented to us several months ago, and we know there's been some discussions going on, but the same thing. If the town is still in negotiations, and that was gonna be their position when we had to draw a close on it, could simply say the town has been engaged in discussions with the current and proposed licensee. We're not at liberty to discuss it now because they're still ongoing. However, the actions have been going on behind the scenes. That's fine. At least the report could say that. It would show the readers of the report, the official readers, and then the public, that even though there's not a lot of final points that we can report on in the report, nonetheless, there have been a lot of activities and action going on by those two main entities to try and deal with the priorities of each entity. And that's an indication of the public that there's been a lot of work, and there still is going on, and that's important. The end results will come out when they're available.
Pine, you were reaching for your...
Well, I don't want to be stuck just adopting last year's report as it was written, because as I recall, we were in a hurry to get that report out last year, and as a result of that, there were recommendations by at least one or two of the groups that I was on that didn't make it into the report. So I'd like to, be able to revisit those with the working group, not just kind of on my own working group. Have a meeting and discuss this, because I think that there is value to the work that we've been trying to do, although it can be summarized pretty briefly. I just would like to have a group meeting to do that and not just rely on what was written in last year's report.
I think that's fair. Any,
Yeah,
Mr.
through the
Smith.
chair, to that end, I worked for Ms. Pine last year. She was my chair. She was relentless. I think we met 11 times, if not 12. And I would not want to see any report go out unless it goes through her, okay, representing all the effort she puts in it. But I think the one thing you should take pride from is the things that were the big ticket items for us last year: the ISFE pad relocation, its consideration, its prompting, its encouragement, the rapid decommissioning, the pilot, RAD, all of those various items that we wanted to see open to discussion with whoever is appropriate, not to please us, okay, but for the people like the town that have the stakes in the ground, okay, with the company, whoever owns it, so that they can actually make a factual commitment. So I go with.
Well, to your
Ms.
point,
Bryant.
and Pine, to your point, I think if the working groups want to get together, I would encourage you to do so before the May meeting, so we're prepared to have a discussion. That's homework I would give to the
And
groups.
my point is that besides us getting together, that at least our chair be on that editorial board that makes the final product reflect it.
I think we'd all be the editorial board at the next meeting.
All right? Thank you.
Rich?
Kevin, I think some of the recommendations from last year's report need to be fleshed out a little bit more, needless to say. Last summer, when I was a member of the public and not officially serving on this panel, I had the pleasure of sitting in various working groups, Joe's, Pines, to name some, and Rich Grassie's. And I want to give some fleshing out here as an example. There could be several others on other topics. I had made some findings and recommendations at one of Rich Grassie's working groups about the time of the draft annual report preparation regarding the Department of Public Health's off-site real-time meteorological and radiological monitoring for emergency planning purposes, which, when the final report came out, it had been moved from the Safety and Security Working Group and placed, the monitoring topic got placed in its entirety in the Site Restoration and Cleanup Working Group. My only concern at that time was that it was simply stated that there will be a continued need for on-site and off-site radiological and meteorological monitoring, and I presume that Entergy and any successors would be required to provide adequate funding via a MOU with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But interestingly, the annual report made no specific reference as to why such continued monitoring is necessary and appropriate in terms of cost-benefit, need, and justification. What are they? Well, a couple. Supporting emergency preparedness, evacuation versus shelter-in-place planning in the event of a radiological emergency arising during Pilgrim decommissioning and the indefinite storage of spent nuclear fuel on site. Health and epidemiological studies, should there be any accidental or unforeseen radiological releases to the public and environment during decommissioning. And also helping to confirm that the radiological cleanup standard, whatever that number will be, has been attained prior to the NRC releasing the site license. Finally, I think it would be easier for the interagency working group and the town of Plymouth to negotiate future MOUs with Holtec and to provide the needed financial support for such continued environmental monitoring, including on-site and off-site meteorological and radiological monitoring, by explaining and justifying the reasons clearly and succinctly in future NDCAP reports. So that's just one example. I'm sure there are many others, but I'm familiar with this topic, so I wanted to make a point. Thank you.
And any other thoughts on moving forward with this? Okay. I think, oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to, it seems that we've spent a good deal of time feeling like we were frustrated that maybe not enough folks looked at our report from last year thoroughly enough. And I know I hear when I'm at the interagency work groups, the desire for a good, clear identification of the highest priorities from the NDCAP. So I would recommend that we use the annual report as the vehicle to do that. So I'd really recommend a simplified structure that leads with really concise identification of our priorities. And I don't know that it's important that they come from a work group or from the panel. The panel needs to approve them. We list them. And then I think for each recommendation, we can have a discussion that lays out, you know, why that's a recommendation, why it's important. And I think that would just simplify our communication with the work group.
Senator.
I think what David is saying makes sense. I wonder if there's efficacy in having the chairs of the working groups get together with last year's report and actually do what David is saying, as opposed to reconvening all of the working groups individually. We're still siloed then. And I think if the chairs of the working groups, and obviously an open meeting to anybody on the panel who wants to go, if that group got together with the report and then looked at each of the items in the report and added some, because there is some additional, there are some additional issues that we are going to want to drill down on, and make recommendations or asks, or submit that report to the IWG. I think that's a better structure than trying to go through reconvening all of the individual groups again. So I don't know if the chair, I hate to say that to the chairs of the groups, not having been one, but would you be willing?
As a chairman of one of the groups, I support Dan's recommendation completely. I think that's the most efficient way to go.
So who are the chairs?
So,
I had no intention of reconvening my group anyway, so I.
Same here.
so, well, I was a chair, Pine was a chair, Rich was a chair. Dave was a chair, he's not here. What I can do as an assignment, if it's okay with the board, is to send an email out to all of the chairs to try to determine a date to get together before the next meeting.
Then if you could CC us, because
Oh, absolutely,
there are others
yeah.
might want to come, but
Right.
that's an in-between trying to do that.
Right.
Or trying to do this as a whole group.
Also, to Pine's point, and I agree with it, that over and above the, whatever might be recommended from last year's report that go forward from the panel. If there are any other issues, recommendations, if you will, that the panel members have, separate from last year's report, as Pine mentioned, they ought to be brought to next month's meeting.
Well, I think a perfect example is what you said, the list that the town provided.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's, there's 15 items right there.
That should go in the
that-
report, yeah.
That, I don't know if you mentioned it or you, Joe, but
I was
that
going
is
to.
something that absolutely should be in the report.
Up front.
I also, my memory's a little foggy. I don't think we had the proposed PSDARs at the
No, we
point we
didn't.
did it last year. So
Right.
clearly, they need to
Right.
be on the table, because they should be very directive as far as as far as the report.
I'm a little confused. You mean the Holtec and Entities PSD?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because we don't have a decision yet from the NRC as far as.
Right,
they said.
but we made a conscious decision, at least that's what I recall, because I raised it several times in previous months. Would the panel review those PSDARs and then decide whether we wanted to provide any comments to them, either directly to the NRC or through the IWG or whatever? And as I recall, because I was very focused on that, the decision was made that because the IWG took that responsibility and submitted their comments, that the panel wouldn't duplicate that.
So Joe,
We didn't do it.
I think we're in sort of violent agreement. What I'm really saying is not that we do a deep dive on that, but that we at least flag issues that we now know are submitted through the PSDARs, that may or may not be germane relative to the report we did last year. So that we use them as part of the process to update what this year's report says, because that will be somewhat directive to the IWG also.
To the extent, I guess, that people,
Right.
I
Have-
haven't
have the
reviewed-
time
I
to-
made the conscious decision not to spend the time on it, as the IWG did, and there's a hell of a lot of work that goes into that.
Yep.
And I wasn't gonna duplicate the effort.
Okay.
But to the extent
Well,
that anybody else has that,
maybe
I
to the
agree with
extent that the IWG can provide an update on maybe some of the issues without violating any confidentiality, that they want information included in our report.
But their comments are public.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we all, the IWG, we all reviewed both PSDARs, and they, our views on those documents are reflected in the filings that the AGO has made. But I think to the extent that, if we, in looking at what has been filed, if we feel that something's missing, then I think, the annual report would be the opportunity to flag that as a recommendation.
That's, yeah.
Rich?
I was just trying to think back to coming to the panel meetings last year, and since I've been on the panel, I don't recall hearing anything specific raised as a question that I could put my finger on, other than what I read in terms of issues presented in both the AGOs and Pilgrim Watch's interventions on the license transfer application to PSDARs, pertaining mainly to the adequacy of the decommissioning trust funds and adequacy of the questions we were talking about earlier today about the staff and do we have enough, does Holtec have enough staff or CDI to do this, that, and then the adequacy of the licensee, current licensee and future licensee, Holtec, being able to make use of the NRC's generic environmental impact report for, that was used as part of the applications, as opposed to creating a new site-specific study that may be more up to date. Is there anyone on the panel who can recall having another specific comment or question relative to these documents? I think I recall what Joe has said is correct in terms of the history, but has anything since then changed in that regard that anyone can think of that is missing, that hasn't been raised as part of the current interventions? I think not. Unless,
Okay, we're getting close here then, so we'll try to wrap this.
Just an additional comment on that. When I saw the draft that the chairman had sent out and went through it, along with the minutes and so forth, and noticed the differences between my draft and his draft, I didn't realize that Sean was out of the country. So I sent him an email raising questions about it, particularly because of our previous discussions. And he indicated he was in Europe, and in essence, it was a brief response, and we sort of agreed to discuss it when he gets back. But in essence, my read of his response was, this version is really more informed than substance, in that what I had said went into my draft as a result of my conversations with him earlier, and this is not really any significant change in what we had proposed before, even though it may appear to be. So whether taking that listing of attachment Z or whatever it's called in the end is simply a one-liner and the work groups are taken out of it or not, the real substance of what Rich and I had talked about and some of the other stuff would still be in there. It's just the outline format may be a little different.
I'm having trouble here. I hear all this discussion about the annual report, but yet I see last year's annual report, and not too many people read it. And I'm not even sure what the purpose was. Certainly to document our...
Part of our charge.
I haven't finished yet. Certainly to document our activities and report to the governor. But I would think that, I don't know, Joe, I don't want to get into, a long discussion with you about it, but, you made a comment earlier that regardless of what we have from the working groups and what the chairs have, if it changes the annual report substantially, so be it. I don't see that at all. I just see it being manipulate the current one, add, subtract, edit, and move on. I don't see putting a whole lot of effort into it. If nobody's going to read it, why do it?
Well, the purpose of doing it is the legislative
it's-
requirement.
I
Again,
understand it is, and I said it was, and it goes to the governor, but who are we talking to here since nobody read it?
But I agree with you, Rich, that since the work groups have not met this year, we have either a few individual new issues that may go into it, that I think have already been brought up. But again, the others are on the table and have never been officially commented on. So that simply means
And they
if
probably
there's
won't either.
new stuff, but so what?
But-
That's
but
the-
just
That is
to-
the option of the
right.
recipients of the report. That doesn't change our legislative responsibility to do the report.
So,
Unless-
so let's see if I can put a bow around this and wrap it up. I think we're in agreement that the chairs will try to get together, review the previous report, pull out what they think is relevant. If there are other issues that have come up, like the town's issues or others that have been identified, we will discuss those and vote on those as a panel.
Yeah, and there is a difference, which is we do have an audience now in the IWG. I mean, I think from what I heard from David is if we do a report and give it to the working group, the interagency working group will actually use it as not as directive necessarily, but at least,
Even if it's just a guide.
yeah.
So, okay.
Point
You
of
want the last word, Paul?
I hope, not really. Point of information, though. So, for instance, like those 12 items for the town, okay? Now, the chair and I have had discussion at that time, and I thought, okay, after review of them, that 5 were probably actually detrimental to the town, okay? And so will this level of detail be discussed at the chair's meeting? Because
Well, if we want to get into that level of detail, the document we voted on as a whole, so that's something that we had voted on to support.
Right, but I think we're more knowledgeable now. We know how the money flows. We know how, you can't legislate
Well,
money.
I
There's so much
don't think
money.
it's up to us to dictate to the town. I think if the town has some changes based on their discussions with Holtec, either John, who I know had to leave, or Chairman Tavares can communicate those to us, and we can modify that list as needed.
I stand corrected. I certainly agree with that.
Okay.
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 Can I just, Mr. Chair, just speak to Senator Wolf's comment? And I think that's true. We need to really focus on this is probably, arguably, a more important annual report than last year's annual report. You know, the PSDARs are out there. The license transfer is being considered by NRC. We have an interagency work group now. We have the AGO in the middle of motions. We have the AGO attempting to negotiate a settlement. So, really, this is the time to get them a really clear, concise identification of our priorities so that they know what they are and they have at least the opportunity to take them into consideration while they're negotiating.
Okay. With that, with everybody's permission, I'd like to move on to old business. Any old business? Any new business? Okay.
Mr.
Nope.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
I don't think it's new business, but we're talking a little bit about the next meeting and some of the things that'll be on the agenda. I think it will be a very important meeting for Entergy to provide an update on the shutdown, subsequent actions, and the future. So I'd like to ensure we have an opportunity on the agenda to talk about, I think, what we're really here to understand and learn, and that's the transition to decommissioning and where we're going in the future. We may even have some updates on where we stand with the transaction at that point. So while I think it's important that we spend time on the annual report, I think it's equally as important we get the opportunity to bring you up to date on where we stand after a number of very key milestones would have either just happened or about to happen, with the very next day being our separation date.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would convey and invite Holtec also. We can dedicate some time to Holtec at the next meeting so they can bring us up to date on any progress they have as well.
Mr. Chair, that's a really good point, and I guess I throw it out to the panel. Because of that, and the importance and the timing of it all, would it be worthwhile to then put a line item in the annual report where Entergy would provide a status of where they are, what's going on, and so forth and so on? Because the readers of it, and hopefully there'll be more readers this time, but that's a very important public information item as to a component of what we've all been doing. And I think Joe made an excellent point, and I think we ought to at least consider, should something like that, a status report update from Entergy, be an item in the actual report this year?
I have a comment on that.
Go ahead, Rich.
2 months after it's in the annual report, it's not valid, because Entergy will have taken further steps. I would propose that we ask that Entergy, until the license is transferred, that Entergy give a report at every single meeting that we have, monthly, on the decommissioning, and that Holtec take that over when the decommissioning is actually being run by Holtec.
I will point out also that all presentations are put on our website, so we can reference the fact that those presentations are available on the website rather than include them into the entire report.
But even the stuff that will go into the report in the end, whatever it winds up being, some of it will be out of date
Yeah.
before the report's actually printed.
Right.
Particularly because of the ongoing negotiations between the licensees and the IWG and the town. So I don't think that should limit what goes into the report. It's just as of the timing of the report, that's the status of everything. And because so many things are ongoing, it's understood that a number of those things will change afterwards. That's kind of the nature of reports anyway.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments on new business? All right, we are actually a little bit ahead despite the fact that we started 5 minutes late. We're actually picked up 5 minutes. So following in our absent chair's regular practice, can I see a show of hands? How many people would like to speak? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, we'll hold you to the end or any questions. So I've got 5 people, 25 minutes, 5 minutes each, and we'll start in the back and work our way over this way. So, Jeremy, we'll have you as the last word. How's that sound?
Hi, John Gawley, Hingham. I just want to express my gratitude to the panel. So much I hear from both Entergy and Holtec sounds like manipulative bullshit for people more concerned about money than the health and safety of the Commonwealth. Just as a layperson, I don't understand anything you're saying and why there's so much crap. What I heard was that the bulk of the moving of the rods is going to happen in March 2020. Is that true? Is that what you said?
What I indicated was that our schedule for moving the fuel would have us constructing the pad this year, and then starting next year, we would go into the campaign of moving the rest of the fuel, which would then take about another year and a half after that, with a target to have all fuel moved by the end of 2021.
2021. So 2020 is Pilgrim's 400th anniversary. I'm assuming the town is going to be packed with more tourists and more events and just more people in town. Is there going to be extra safety put in place or some kind of public notice that there's radiation being moved around? Is that more dangerous for the general populace? I don't know, but for my mind, just curious of that.
I guess for what my comments are worth, because obviously you didn't think they were very good earlier, our security is 24/7, 365. It doesn't matter how many people are in town. There's no trespassing on our site. And
what about evacuation?
We'll make sure
evacuate.
All of our emergency plans will be in place, and they take into consideration working with MEMA, traffic flows and things like that. But you also have to realize that once we shut down, the type of emergencies we have are very much less than when we're operating. So the amount of risk is significantly reduced in the emergency plan. However, will still be in effect during that time.
And my last comment to the panel, if no one's reading your annual report, does this go to the general populace? It is? I mean,
the answer to the
I
question
didn't see it anywhere.
is yes, again, it's available on the website.
Just online. I mean, I'm amazed that there's not more people here. I mean, they should be really angry. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Okay, I had somebody behind you, Mary, had their hand up, but I can't see. Okay, come on up, and then we'll, nope, behind you, Jim. Oh.
Hi, Janet Azarovitz, from Falmouth, but a member of Pilgrim Legislative Advisory Coalition, a group that was formed in 2015. Some of us had taken to the streets before and done some civil disobedience, and in that point in time, about 40 people came together, activists, representatives of state environmental groups, people who wanted to do something a little different. And we did. We came together and decided that we would talk to our legislators about the conditions at Pilgrim and to see if our voices could be heard in trying to make it a safer place, a safer environment. And so I'm here because we have about 8 bills that are out there and are up for discussion. They're not, in front of the Joint Committee on Public Health, and as well as the Joint Committee of Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. The hearing dates haven't been assigned, but I'm here to ask if I could have some commitment from the group to support these bills, which are important to every single resident, all of you, as residents of the Commonwealth. They are something that we've been asking for. They're supported and co-sponsored, sponsored by our legislators from both sides of the aisle. There's no one side to the issue with Pilgrim. And I think I've got a packet, for each of you, a very brief summary of each of the bills. But on the masslegislature.gov website, it goes into detail. And if you could see and read in detail these bills, I think you would learn a lot. I mean, I know it's a little bit more work, some reading material, but I really think it's important. This group is here because of some action that the community members went and worked with legislators, and because of two brilliant legislators that made this happen. We have a group that we can speak to. I haven't heard any real commitment, though, and it's something I don't really understand. This is, again, it's a nonpartisan issue. It is affects every single one of us and our future. So I would hope that you would seriously take a look at these bills. And if there were a commitment from the committee, that would be greatly appreciated by the community, I am sure. And I hope and I open to everyone in the audience to look at these bills and to write, call, email. They're really open to hearing from us, and our words are important. So I thank you all for doing this. It's been a long haul, but I think it's worthwhile. So I'd like to pass these out.
Feel
if I
free.
could.
If you just want to start here, and we can just pass them around. And I believe the Lamperts had emailed us some of the links to these as well. I think
I
these are
didn't
similar.
hear, I was not here at the last meeting. I know it's been mentioned, but I really wish that the panel, could do something in writing to support.
Rich?
Janet, thanks for reminding us of these pending bills. One, I can't remember which bill or which legislator was proposing the specific bill, but it had to do with the licensee, whether it's Entergy or Holtec, providing $25 million a year until such time that the Pilgrim site is fully decommissioned. And I recall in reading the bill that there's a difference in opinion or in terms of what was considered to be a fully decommissioned site. The NRC's definition was basically when the plant gets decommissioned, the spent nuclear fuel in the cast has a separate license there. But the bill that I was reading was saying that the $25 million a year being put in an escrow would go on until such time that all spent nuclear fuel would leave the premises is to be considered. So that could be a potential concern in terms of the discrepancy in getting that resolved. I just wanted to make that distinction. Thank you.
I think decommissioning is defined in that bill quite carefully.
Oh, okay, we can, if you guys want to bring that up
Unless it
during your
was
time.
changed recently, that's
Okay.
how I had read it.
Okay,
Thank
again,
you.
it's worth looking at the
Thank you.
text completely. Thank you.
Jim?
None of this is what I was planning to say as I was coming over here tonight. 3 quick points, just factually. 1999, Paul keeps referring to. I think it's worth noting in that time when licenses were transferred, there was a more than $500 million commitment by various energy people in case they ran out of money. Holtec would strike that from the new license. It's gone. The senator raised the question of where's the money coming from. Holtec has said it intends to sue for $500 million to recover spent fuel management costs. It has steadfastly refused to say or agree to put that money back into the decommissioning fund from whence it came so it would pay any costs. Exactly where that's going to go, I've read a lot of papers, and like the senator, I haven't seen anywhere that's going to go. But the most important point is, and it was talked about tonight, and I appreciate Jeremy's, but you're not a corporate lawyer, right? You are not a corporate lawyer, am I correct?
No, I'm not the corporate lawyer.
Because the idea that Holtec International is responsible for liabilities is flatly at odds with the entire corporate structure that is laid out in the license transfer application. I don't expect there are many corporate lawyers here. I expect Dan has spent more time sitting with them than he wants to. But he's absolutely right. People form corporations so that if I own a corporation, the stock may go worthless, but I have no liability for anything that corporation does. Commissioning CDI is going to be jointly owned. It's a separate company. It's going to be jointly owned by SMC and HDI. HDI is a separate company. It's owned by a subsidiary of Holtec International. No liability goes upstream, zero. Holtec Pilgrim is the other licensee. It will, I'm just repeating what I said last week. Holtec Pilgrim will own the decommissioning fund. It will own the Pilgrim site. It will be one of the two licensees. HDI will be the other. It is an LLC. None of its foibles will be visited on any of its upstream parents. I urge the panel to open up the LTA. Look at the organization chart that's fairly eerily in it. It tells you what is an LLC. LLC is simply a special word for a different type of corporate structure, but it does the same thing. It isolates everybody upstream from any of the crimes, et cetera, of people downstream, unless you, quote, pierce the corporate veil, which is practically never done. You recall Bruce Watson from the NRC was here. They were, quote, looking into that. My most recent information, and it's not overly recent, is they have not found anything, and their basic papers tell you that they have no authority to go upstream. If you want a corporate lawyer to look at this, please do. It isn't easy. It is laid out in a lot of detail in the LTA. But if you read it and work through it and ask questions of people who are knowledgeable about corporate structures, they will tell you that there is no liability going to Holtec International. There is no liability, frankly, for CDI going to HDI. Say nothing of HDI going up. There is no liability of Holtec Pilgrim that will go upstream. They have, quote, assets, some, that's all you're ever going to get. And just one quick final point. We talk about the Holtec PSDAR. We've talked also about the petitions that were filed, one by Pilgrim Watch and one by the Attorney General. Also, because I filed it myself, there is an analysis of the Holtec PSDAR. I thought I had sent it to everybody on this panel. If you want to know what that PASDR says, read it. I'll send it out again tonight or tomorrow morning.
30
It is
seconds,
in a lot
Jim.
more detail than anything that you'll find in the Attorney General's papers. He took one level, we took another.
Thank you.
You had a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, at some point, I'd like to make a comment. I think probably after, and I apologize for not doing it before, but relative to some of the things that Jim just said.
Would you like to do it now, or would you like to wait till the end? We
do
can
it
do it
after,
till
if
the end.
that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Also, I appreciate David Johnson's comment in which, and request of this board, which was to get your priorities in ASAP while they are relevant to the interagency group. We, Pilgrim Watch, sent you, and obviously the AGO, our priorities. 25 pages were very easily digestible, okay? And then there was 25 pages of a backup rationale. If you've lost it or never got it, can send it out again. It might give you ideas of what you would like to do. It is also very clear that in November, the PSDARs came out and the LTAs. It is May, and it might be a good time to read them. They are not long. Jim said he would send you the comments that he submitted on Entergy's, and I also, I believe, sent you the comments on Holtec's. And so you have a Reader's Digest that you may want to consider. In reading your last year's recommendations, the third, I believe, said you were going to make comments to the interagency working group and stakeholders to develop and enact legislation as necessary on matters such as sufficient funds to complete the decommissioning process. To follow up on Mrs. Azarowitz, fortunately, Senator O'Connor and Senator Sear beat you to it. So why not read their bill, which is practically the same language as was submitted by Senator Wolf. That is S 1992 and S 1948, asking for the $25 million. An insurance policy, I think it coincides with a priority here. Another priority was on emergency planning. Surprise, surprise, there happens to be a bill on emergency planning. In fact, two bills. One incorporates in Senator DiMacedo's bill, S 1949, and a bill by Josh Cutler, H 3492. Also important, that's money. Money, MEMA's losing, what, $1.1 million. Town of Duxbury, I'm from, is losing $86 million. Plymouth is losing a lot of money. The risk remains. And therefore, it would behoove also the Executive Secretary of Public Safety, maybe that could be a recommendation, that she act in support of that bill. And also for Secretary Sutters, that also is losing a piece of the action. Monitoring was another part. There are bills for monitoring. DiMacedo talks about it in his bill, and Representative Machino in House Bill 1970. So there are bills there. And so you might consider, when you're giving your priorities to the interagency working group, to suggest that they also have a word, talk to the governor, et cetera, behind the scenes, that to get some action on these bills. And so the state, although it has limited abilities, the state has ability. You have abilities. The interagency working group has abilities. The AGO has abilities if they take it. And therefore, it's important that citizens and these various groups put pressure on these groups, and so what is best for the Commonwealth happens. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. So please do your reading and we'll send you the Cliff Notes.
Thank you. Henrietta.
Henrietta Cosentino, resident of Plymouth, member of the League of Women Voters, Plymouth area, and chair of their Nuclear Affairs Committee. Actually, all the comments aforegoing have been taken out of my mouth. I mean, I was going to make all the comments that have been made, and I really want to thank John Golly, for putting in layman's terms basically what Jim Lampert explained in very careful, scholarly, lawyerly terms. We're at Schitt's Creek, basically, because it's very obvious that when we have 4 different corporations, each one of them insulated from liability, and one of them isn't even on the board, it just got overlooked, but it's actually the most important one. What is going on here? It seems like a shell game to me. But moving on to legislation, I just don't understand why the panel has not taken the legislation that already exists and supported it. Every single one of these bills, some of them are better than others. But the fact is we're 15, 16 days from shutdown, and most of all of these bills are time sensitive. If the financial year runs out without action, then where is the funding that we need for radiological monitoring? Where is the funding we need for emergency planning, for site cleanup? All of these things are rather urgent, and they have so much impact on the Commonwealth, its financial well-being, and the health and welfare of its citizens. I am appalled that there's been no discussion by the panel about these legislative bills that have been proposed. And the fact is, not a single one of them has had a hearing yet. That is very bad news, because if they don't come to a hearing, they're holed up in committee, they basically die. And this is the one opportunity for the Commonwealth to have an impact in a situation where the Commonwealth has very little power, and yet this is the power it has. This is where the sausage gets made, in these legislative committees. And it makes a difference to the Commonwealth, to the town of Plymouth, and to the health and welfare of every citizen if this legislation does not get dealt with in a timely manner. So that's my comment. I know it's a very difficult thing that you are doing. The very fact that nuclear energy requires for its decommissioning a panel this complex is actually the evidence that nuclear energy is unlike coal or oil or any other kind of energy, because the toxicity of this energy lasts for 250,000 years. It is not a small thing. This is a very serious matter. And the very fact that we, in order to have any citizen impact at all for a subject that is so difficult to understand and takes so much homework, even for the experts, let alone for the lay people, is evidence that nuclear energy is highly dangerous. And I don't know what's going to happen if you haven't got a report together that even addresses the legislation that is in the Congress right now and waiting for action. So I'm sorry for the work that it takes, and I appreciate all of your work, but I'm praying that something productive will come out of this panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Kevin, may I make a comment to Henrietta just before?
Why don't we finish off, and then I'll bring it back to the board for comments. Okay.
Again, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. First, I would say that You know, I do appreciate the comments that are coming from the public because those do matter. I do appreciate the fact that you are having those under consideration, but more importantly, supplying us with a platform to address these and come out and speak. Now, our mission is to create that transparency and have these actual conversations and discussions that we can go forward with in the future without the sensationalism of the zaps here and there that just make headlines. I think it's more productive for the community and others that we continue this dialogue. With that, though, there were a couple of questions that I do recall from the last time I was here that didn't get answered. So one of them was, you know, does Holtec currently have the contract for the ISFSI? The answer is yes. They're at a position now where they've completed some of the design work, or I believe they're actually to the point they've completed the design work, and the construction will start very soon. The question was, you know, would they have done this work regardless? The answer is yes. The contract was issued under standard procurement terms with Entergy, so these things would have happened. The other big question that was outstanding still was the request of whether or not Holtec would honor the pilot tax agreements for the next 2 years, and the answer to that is yes, we are positioned to do so in line with what Entergy has agreed to. So I think those were a couple of very big points. And again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Senator, I think you want to make a comment first, and then Rich.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this is going to be a little bit wordy, but I have to say, I feel compelled tonight. In addition to being a former senator, which was a side career for a few years, I've got 42 years as a pilot, 38 years as an aircraft mechanic, and 30 years of this as the CEO of an airline. I also serve as the accountable executive relative to the safety function at the airline. Airlines and what we're talking about tonight have a lot of similarities. They're highly regulated. Safety has to come first for the public. There's federal preemption with a federal agency. And the industry was deregulated in 1978. After a certain number of years, post-deregulation, the idea of selling what's called an operating certificate or operation specifications, transferring it from one corporate group to another, became illegal. You cannot transfer operating license from one corporate entity to another in my industry. And the reason that I keep honing in on that, and the concern I have relative to what we're talking about specifically with the corporate structure going forward, is that is a lesson learned the real hard way in the airline industry. That type of corporate structure, the veil, the lack of clarity, the opaqueness, the shedding of liability, the creating of silos, all of those things, they were completely eliminated. Because in my industry, you either buy the corporation to get the certificate or you get nothing. And part of my concern, I just, to the panel, if you wonder why I keep fixating on that, it's because I'm in a very similar industry where the type of transaction that you're seeing has been illegal for decades at this point. And there's a reason for that. The other thing I would say is that I would be willing, I understand how legislation moves and doesn't move. I understand I was in the room when it happened and more often when it didn't happen. If this group would like me to follow through on when the hearing dates are and a report out on the legislation, to the public who had the question, I would say, one of the reasons it's going to be difficult is when we take a vote, remember who's at the table here. It's not going to be easy to get to 11 when we're talking about supporting legislation. That is design of this committee. We wanted a committee that included a lot of different interests. That's why Entergy is here. It's why we have a lot of government agencies. The government agencies will probably not be able to vote when we talk about supporting legislation, and I think there's a legitimate reason for that. So I have no problem keeping us up to speed and up to date on the legislation, but I think the idea that this committee is going to be able to get 11 votes to support a lot of these bills is going to be really tough. So I just, that's a cautionary note. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for dragging
That's okay. Thank you. Rich?
I just would like to add, I didn't say before, I'm out of line.
Can you make it quick, please? And can come to the mic if you want to say something so everyone can hear. But I would ask you to be brief, please.
Very brief. As individuals, I could ask you the same question. I mean, each one of us has a stake in this. So you don't have to say that you're part of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. If you're a citizen, if you vote, you have something to say.
Thank you. Rich?
Some of these pending legislative bills have been brought up over the past 5, 6 years. I remember even back in 2015, when I was helping to spearhead our Nuclear Matters Committee report to the Board of Selectmen on Pilgrim, that we had a section discussing some of these pending bills and potential impact it could have or not have, whether they were passed or not. My question is more to Senator Wolf, since you were serving, I think, as a legislator then. There were some potential merits for some of the bills, maybe not for others, but my sense at the time, and still is that the politics runs thick and deep at the state legislative level. And if any group that is going to have an impact on the current state legislature on these bills, it's going to be the IWG at the state level there. But from a historical standpoint, can you put your finger on anything that why these bills never got any further than they
The
did?
departments and the AG can come and testify at the hearing. So that, you know, the IWG probably won't as a group speak, because I don't think that's the structure of the group, but certain departments certainly could come and weigh in. I agree with Janet that as individuals, there's nothing to prevent us from testifying at the hearing, representing that we're members of this group, but being clear that we don't represent this group. I think if we want to talk about trying to get 11 votes on a certain piece of legislation, I think that's great, because it would be great if the chairs went to testify and say it wasn't unanimous, but a majority of the committee did this or that. That was not the intent when this committee was established, however. We were not established to be a legislative advocacy group, although I'm not ruling that out, Rich. I think we need to understand.
I was just trying to get a sense of the history, though, why it never got any further each year. You know, just in terms of.
Thank you. All right,
That would require an entire evening workshop on legislation.
I kind of know the answer, but I didn't want to.
That's a better discussion over a beer. Okay, if that's it, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? See you all next month.